In the 1970s, in a quiet Los Angeles neighborhood, Doris Bither lived with her 4 children in a small, run-down house. She seemed ordinary, a struggling mother trying to survive. But what began in that home would become one of the most violent and disturbing supernatural cases ever documented. This was no campfire tale or rumor. Doris claimed she was being attacked by unseen forces. She told neighbors and later investigators that invisible entities assaulted her physically and sexually, often leaving bruises and scratches. At first, no one believed her. Then her children began to witness the same thing. They described flashes of light, moving shadows, and objects thrown across rooms. The events were so extreme that researchers Dr. Barry Taff and Carrie Gaynor from UCLA's parapsychology department became directly involved. They entered the home with cameras and recording equipment, expecting to debunk a frightened woman's imagination. What they found left them shaken. During their investigations, they documented unexplained cold spots and light anomalies that appeared to move in midair. Photographs captured streaks and globes of light forming around Doris, even though there were no reflective surfaces or light sources in the room. Witnesses reported seeing a figure, a faint, distorted shape, hovering over her during one of the attacks. The team tried to test every scientific angle: electrical fields, air pressure, hallucinogenic gases. None of it explained what they saw. One investigator said he heard guttural growls, low and rhythmic, coming from nowhere. Another described an overwhelming smell of ozone just before objects began flying. Over the following months, the attacks grew worse. Doris moved several times, but the phenomena followed her. She became paranoid and withdrawn, convinced that she was being stalked by something that fed on fear. The entity film dramatized her story, toning down the sexual violence, but preserving the atmosphere of terror. In reality, the attacks were more frequent and brutal than the movie ever showed. Doris's son later confirmed that even years later, odd noises and flashes still haunted them. This case stands apart because it was studied by scientists, not just priests or paranormal investigators, and still had no clear explanation. It remains one of the few possession or haunting cases backed by photographic evidence. Whether it was psychological trauma or something truly inhuman, Doris Bither's experience became a nightmare that no one could completely explain. Before there was a movie, there was a boy who terrified priests, doctors, and his own family. His name was never released, but history remembers him as Roland Doe, a 14-year-old from Maryland whose behavior and surroundings defied logic. It began quietly in 1949. Strange scratching sounds echoed through the house. Furniture moved without reason. Religious items fell or shattered. The family thought rodents might be the cause until the bed began to shake violently while Roland was sleeping. Soon, words started to appear on his skin, raised marks that looked carved as if by invisible hands. The family first turned to doctors. Roland was taken to Georgetown University Hospital, where medical staff ran tests. They could not find any illness or disorder to explain the sounds, the movements, or his sudden ability to speak in languages he had never learned. Witnesses included nurses and physicians, trained professionals who had no reason to exaggerate what they saw. When the family reached out to the Catholic Church, Father Raymond Bishop and other priests began a formal investigation. What they saw during the exorcism became one of the most documented possession cases in American history. Father Bishop kept a detailed diary describing objects flying across rooms, guttural voices coming from Roland, and the boy screaming in Latin and Greek at the same time. At one point, a priest's nose was broken when Roland lashed out with unnatural strength. Even more unsettling were the moments when the boy's demeanor changed entirely. He would slip into violent fits, then whisper calmly in a voice that did not sound like his own. The ritual stretched over weeks, taking place in multiple locations. Family members, clergy, and medical staff all witnessed supernatural events that no one could explain. When the final exorcism ended, Roland fell still, muttered a single word, "Gone," and the phenomena stopped. The movie The Exorcist took those records and transformed them into cinematic terror. The spinning head and levitating bed were fiction, but the core came straight from the diary of Father Bishop. The real case had no need for exaggeration. It was already too strange to comprehend. Few haunted houses have gained as much attention as the one on 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. The house already carried tragedy before the Lutz family ever moved in. In 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered 6 members of his family inside that home. A year later, George and Kathy Lutz bought it at a low price, thinking the past was behind them. They lasted 28 days. From the first night, they noticed the air felt wrong, cold and heavy. Doors slammed on their own. Greenish slime oozed from keyholes. George began waking every night at 3:15 a.m. The exact time the murders occurred, he became distant and irritable, often staring into the fire for hours without speaking. Kathy started having vivid dreams about the killings and saw shadows moving across the walls. The family reported that windows opened by themselves, crucifixes twisted upside down, and their daughter spoke to a phantom she called Jody, describing it as a pig-like creature with glowing eyes. When a priest attempted to bless the house, he heard a deep male voice shout, "Get out!" After less than a month, the Lutz family fled, leaving all their possessions behind. Investigators who entered afterward reported drastic temperature drops and foul odors with no source. One team claimed to find photographs showing unexplained figures in the house. Skeptics questioned the Lutz account, but there were details that resisted easy dismissal. A television crew recorded compass malfunctions inside the home. The Lutz family took polygraph tests and passed. The Amityville Horror film built on these reports but rearranged events for pacing. The bleeding walls and exaggerated violence were fiction. Yet the root events were pulled straight from police reports and first-hand interviews. Even decades later, no one agrees on what really happened in that house. Some say the haunting was fueled by the murders that stained its walls. Others believe the family encountered something older and much darker. The Amityville home has since been remodeled, its windows changed, its address altered. But people still drive by, hoping to feel what the Lutz family felt. The truth remains tangled between documented facts and personal experience. But the fear that poured from that house was real enough to change everyone who entered it. If these stories already feel too real, remember, each one was documented long before the cameras rolled. Stay with this, because the next cases go even darker. In the late 1980s, Al and Carmen Snedeker moved into a modest rental home in Southington, Connecticut, to be closer to the hospital treating their teenage son's cancer. The house seemed perfect, large, affordable, and near the clinic. What they didn't know at first was that the basement had once served as a funeral home. Soon after settling in, the family found strange tools and mortuary equipment still stored in the basement. Old embalming tables, blood drains, and photographs of corpses were hidden behind walls. The landlord explained it casually, as if it were ancient history. But soon, something began moving in the house. The Snedekers reported cold spots, voices, and apparitions of men in suits standing silently in the hallway. The teenage son claimed that at night he could hear whispering from the basement, a voice repeating prayers backward. At first, the parents thought the stress of illness and relocation was causing hallucinations. Then Carmen saw it herself. shadows crawling along the walls, shapes pressing against the curtains as if someone stood outside. Her younger children began complaining of being touched or pushed by invisible hands. The activity grew more dangerous. Lights flickered. Items flew from shelves. One night, Carmen said she felt someone climb onto the bed beside her, though no one was there. They turned to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the same paranormal investigators from the Conjuring case. The Warrens discovered evidence of seances and necromantic rituals once performed in the funeral home. They believed the building had absorbed violent energy from those acts, energy that attached itself to the living. The family's teenage son began showing violent mood swings and strange marks on his skin. Clergy members who visited described the atmosphere as suffocating. An exorcism was eventually performed by a Catholic priest, during which witnesses said the entire house shook and cold air rushed through the rooms. What made this case credible wasn't just the family's testimony. Neighbors also reported flickering lights and phantom voices coming from the house even when it was empty. Local records confirmed that the building had, in fact, been a mortuary and had a history of occult practices in the mid-20th century. When A Haunting in Connecticut hit theaters, it showed a condensed, dramatized version. One major spirit, one dramatic climax. But the real events were slow, creeping, and relentless. The Snedekers eventually left the house, but their accounts, combined with the Warrens' files, turned the case into one of the best documented hauntings in modern American history. The basement was cleaned out long ago. The equipment was removed. But locals still say the ground beneath the house feels cold, even in the summer, and that lights sometimes flicker when no one's home. In 1971, Roger and Carolyn Perron moved into an old farmhouse in Rhode Island with their 5 daughters. The place had quiet charm, acres of land, and a long history, much longer than they knew. Within days, they realized something dark lived there. At first, it was small things. The broom went missing, then reappeared. Doors opened by themselves. Every clock stopped at the same time. 3:07 a.m. Then came the smell of decaying flesh, cold drafts with no source, and voices whispering in the corners of empty rooms. Carolyn began keeping notes, writing every strange thing she saw or felt. She recorded being touched and even pushed by unseen hands. One night, she woke to see an old woman's face beside her bed. Other nights, her daughters saw floating figures that vanished when they screamed. After months of fear, the Perrons called Ed and Lorraine Warren, the same paranormal investigators later linked to the haunting in Connecticut case. The Warrens' files describe years of escalating activity. Objects flying across rooms, doors slamming shut, and heavy furniture sliding by itself. Neighbors had seen lights flickering in the windows when the family was gone. The Warrens believed one entity in particular targeted the mother. They identified it as a spirit named Bathsheba Sherman, accused in the 1800s of witchcraft and child sacrifice. Whether that name was true or not, the energy in the house was undeniably violent. What made the case convincing was its length and consistency. The Perrons lived there for almost a decade, and every family member reported the same things: scratches appearing on their skin, disembodied voices, and sudden temperature drops. The film condensed those years into one showdown, but in real life, the haunting stretched endlessly. There was no single exorcism that fixed it all. The family eventually moved out, exhausted and broken. The Warrens' documentation included photos, recordings, and written logs describing objects moving in front of multiple witnesses. When The Conjuring hit theaters, audiences assumed Hollywood had exaggerated the story. In truth, it had been softened. The real events involved several spirits, and the activity never stopped the way the credits suggest. What happened in that farmhouse left marks that even time could not erase. Of all real possession cases, few are as tragic and deeply recorded as the one that inspired the exorcism of Emily Rose. It wasn't a haunting. It was a slow collapse of a young woman's life. Her name was Anneliese Michel, a German college student born in 1952. She grew up religious, kind, and intelligent. But at 17, she began suffering violent seizures diagnosed as epilepsy. Medication controlled the convulsions, but something else began to surface. Voices, faces, and a deep belief that she was being invaded by something unholy. Over the next few years, her condition worsened. She described seeing demonic faces during prayer, hearing whispers that mocked her, and being unable to enter churches. Her family sought psychiatric help, but nothing worked. Eventually, priests were called. Two Catholic priests, Ernst Alt and Arnold Renz, believed Anneliese was possessed. The church initially hesitated, but eventually granted permission for an official exorcism. What followed became one of the most heavily documented exorcisms in modern history. Over 10 months, Anneliese underwent 67 exorcism sessions, each lasting up to 4 hours. Priests recorded her voice, where she reportedly spoke in multiple ancient languages, growled, and identified several entities claiming to inhabit her body. She refused to eat, often fell into violent fits, and showed bruises with no physical explanation. The priests and family claimed they saw her strength grow beyond human limits. Witnesses said she could kneel and rise repeatedly for hours without fatigue. Medical experts later testified that she likely suffered from malnutrition and exhaustion. But her symptoms went far beyond what her doctors could explain. In 1976, Anneliese Michel died of dehydration and starvation. She weighed barely 68 pounds. Her parents and the two priests were charged with negligent homicide. The trial that followed turned the world's attention to a haunting question. Where does faith end and medicine begin? During the court proceedings, the recordings of the exorcisms were played. The tapes contained guttural growls and overlapping voices, unsettling enough that even skeptical journalists left the courtroom shaken. Medical professionals argued that her condition was psychological. Religious witnesses insisted that something supernatural had taken control of her. The jury found the parents and priests guilty of negligent homicide, but gave them suspended sentences. The church later revised its exorcism guidelines because of her death. The film, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, captured some of those events through a courtroom lens, mixing faith and law. But even that version softened the reality. The real Anneliese suffered in ways that no movie could safely show. Her grave in Klingenberg, Germany, became a site people still visit, some to pray, some to question. To this day, the recordings and court transcripts remain among the most chilling documents ever produced in connection to an exorcism. Evil leaves traces long after the lights fade. These stories were lived before they were filmed. The names may change, but the darkness never does. If you feel the chill, like, subscribe, and step deeper into the true side of possession.